When Essie and I decided I would preach today, I was delighted to find this week's lectionary text was about Eve and Adam. Eve, the story of Eve and Adam, or Adam and Eve, is one of my absolute favorites. Then I realized there was one problem. Because this is one of my favorite stories, I've already preached on it at DMPC. That's okay, I reasoned. I preached on this a couple of years ago, so really, who would remember it anyway? Then I realized I hadn't preached on Adam and Eve a few years ago. I preached on it in late September 2019, almost exactly a year ago. Friends, I think you will agree that it's been a very, very long year. We are witnessing natural disasters exacerbated by climate change that have literally set an entire state on fire. We are reckoning with the corruption and injustice reeking from some of our most basic institutions. A global pandemic has upturned our lives and killed over 192,000 people in the United States alone. And we are each struggling with our own challenges and tragedies, which are no less real or important than the stories dominating the news. In short, we are a world and a community engulfed in grief and fear. Given this context, I laughed a little when I read my 2019 sermon on Eve and Adam, which celebrates Eve's decision to take that first bite of fruit and send us all on this journey called humanity. I argue in the sermon that it was only by gaining a knowledge of good and evil and leaving the garden that humans were able to learn and grow. It is by leaving the garden and experiencing hardship and pain that Eve and Adam, and therefore all of us, are able to understand and then experience true joy. I encouraged us all to follow God's call out of the garden, out of places of surety and complacency, to embrace the riskier but far more rewarding world of change and learning, a world where we could experience true joy. I'll be honest, after reading today's passages and my former sermon, there is definitely a part of me that would rather take Eden right now. Part of me is totally fine going somewhere that is beautiful and safe, even if it means I won't be able to learn, grow, or live joyfully. There's part of me that's willing to sacrifice all of that just to make the pain stop. I'm tired of mourning. I'm tired of being hopeless. I'm tired of being afraid. I want to return to Eden. Friends, I wonder how often Eve wanted to return to Eden. Even in my interpretation of the story, where Eve's choice to eat the fruit is an act of courage and faith, I wonder how often she wished she had stayed in the garden. I wonder if she laid awake at night, 9 months pregnant and unable to sleep because the baby growing inside her kept kicking, and she was terrified at the idea of giving birth because the last birth had hurt so much. I wonder if she broke down crying one afternoon after she had killed her third snake of the day because they kept getting into their shelter and she didn't know how she could keep going. I wonder if she sometimes walked to the edge of Eden, right up to where the cherubs stood guard with flaming swords, and spent hours staring at the impossibly green trees, the perfectly ripe fruit, and the crystal clear river, wishing with everything she had that she could go back. It is so easy, especially now, to long for the past. I miss the days when we could sing together, hug each other, and break bread together. I miss our sanctuary, our choirs, our coffee hours, and I am counting the days until we can do all of these things together again. But friends, God doesn't call us to find Eden. God doesn't call us to make things as they were before. God calls us to build God's kingdom. God calls us to turn the world upside down. God calls us to eradicate injustice and oppression so that we can truly see each other and treat each other as siblings, as children of God. When we lose ourselves trying to recreate an idealized version of the past, we lose sight of God's coming kingdom. More than that, our determination to chase Eden can lead us to sacrifice our own freedoms, our own morals, and to support the oppression of others. It may seem incredible at first that people would willingly sacrifice their freedom and their siblings for an imagined past, but this is actually a common phenomenon, even on a national scale. Perhaps the most notorious example is Nazi Germany. Adolf Hitler didn't lead a violent revolution. He was lawfully elected to power. He manipulated the fear and grief of a nation reeling from a near total economic, political, and social collapse after World War I and the Great Depression. He promised to restore Germany to its former glory. He told them that white, straight Christians were special, so they deserved to put themselves first. All Germany needed to do was turn over a little bit of freedom. They just needed to eliminate a few inefficient and inconvenient pieces of their democracy. They needed to increase the size and power of their police force to protect society. They needed to grow the military so that they could expand their territory. Hitler also claims that there was a simple cause to all of their problems: the Jews. So Germany needed to be brave enough to do what no one else would and eliminate the existential threat this entire group of people posed. Hitler promised to return Germany to its past. He promised to recreate Eden. What we often forget, or just neglect to mention, is that during this time, Hitler and fascism were popular in the United States too. Research conducted by Seva Gunitsky, a Canadian political scientist, reveals just how enticing Americans found fascist ideologies and policies. A 1940 poll revealed 20% of Americans considered Jews a national menace. and another poll in 1942 found that 1 in 6 Americans supported Hitler's anti-Semitic policies, even in the middle of the war. American celebrities, religious leaders, economists, politicians, and political scientists openly praised Nazi Germany and advocated for integrating elements of fascism, and yes, they used the word fascism, into American government and society. As in Germany, pro-fascist Americans, exhausted and scared after the devastation caused by the Great Depression, wanted to return to an idealized version of the past. And if that meant marginalizing Jews or discriminating and killing people of color, well, that was a small price to pay. Anything was worth recreating Eden. A willingness to sacrifice the lives and well-being of others, as well as our own freedoms, in the face of fear and grief is not unique to the 30s and 40s. We again live in a nation with drastic income inequality, a rapidly changing economy that is leaving millions behind, political polarization, and now a devastating pandemic with a horrific recession accompanying it. People are scared, and they are desperate to return to the good old days. These good old days are usually depicted as a world where America, and specifically white Christian Americans, always come first. It depicts immigrants, people of color, LGBTQ folks, Muslims, and anyone else who doesn't conform to an incredibly specific definition of normal as dangerous, as other. This vision justifies the murder of Black and brown Americans by police, discrimination based on gender and sexuality, the separation of immigrant families, state-sponsored aggression against peaceful protests, the weakening of democratic institutions. This vision even makes excuses for murders committed by members of white nationalist militias. And let's be clear, murders committed by Nazis. Make no mistake, this search for a restored America, for a return to greatness, is predicated on bigotry, oppression, and violence. Friends, we live in difficult and uncertain times. Our nation, our city, and our church are in the midst of dramatic and unprecedented change. And it's okay to be scared. I'm scared. But we have an important choice to make. We can lean into our fear and choose to chase Eden. We can try to recreate an idealized past that never truly existed, whether that be a time when America was great, or Baltimore was booming, or DMPC's pews were filled every Sunday. Or we can accept God's invitation to God's kingdom, a kingdom predicated on justice and love. Perhaps Eve did stand at the edge of Eden, reminiscing about a place that was gone forever, a place that offered her comfort, but not growth, a place where life was easy, but not joyful. But I think in the end, she always returned home. I think when she arrived at her family's little camp, her children ran to greet her. I think Adam looked up from where he was fixing the hole in the wall where the snakes kept getting in and smiled. I think when evening drew near and the day's work was done, Eve sat with her family and watched the sun set. I think she took a deep breath and remembered that she and Adam were literally created by the breath of God. I think she reminded herself that while she was no longer in Eden, God's Spirit, God's Ruach, flowed through every breath she took. And I think she felt grateful and proud of the life her family had built together, morning sickness, snakes, and all. I think she always chose to follow God's call to create something new. So may it be with all of us.